Everyone. My name is Kathy Bensvenga. I'm the Administrative Director of Education and Community Engagement here at the Alley, and I am thrilled to welcome you all into our space this evening. The Alley Theater was founded in 1947 and is now one of the largest theater companies in the U.S. outside of New York City. We have 10 to 11 productions annually between our two spaces in this building. Currently on the Hubbard Theater is Noises Off. This is an exciting kickoff to our subscription season, starring our resident acting company. It's a hilarious comedy that shows you everything that could go wrong on and off the stage. In the Newhouse Theater downstairs, we've just opened the Janiad. This world-premiered play is a New York Times recommendation as one of the top 15 shows to see in the US this fall. It explores the parallels between Penelope from the Odyssey and Jane, a 9/11 widow from Brooklyn. And this weekend, we are featuring our Alley All New Festival. It features new plays in development from some of the most exciting new voices in contemporary theater. There are 4 staged readings happening and 2 panel discussions with the playwrights. Mark your calendars and get your free tickets to these readings October 25th through 27th on our website. Thank you again for being here tonight, and I'm happy to hand it off now to Rich.
Thank you, Kathy. Hello, everyone. Well, in the way that life is always perfect, there was no attendant in the parking garage tonight. I'm sorry about that. We'll figure it out. If we owe you money, we're good for it, okay? So please let us know. Sorry about the inconvenience. This is supposed to be a well-oiled machine by now, but we're getting there, maybe someday. Anyway, welcome to the 24-25 Inprint Margarett Root Brown reading series. Tonight we are so happy to welcome back to Houston our friend Richard Powers with his powerful new novel, Playground, in conversation with another good friend, Lacy Johnson. Thank you. It's wonderful to be in the Alley, as always. Noises Off, always a fun play. And an honor and a pleasure to welcome Richard back to Houston for his 3rd appearance in this series. My name is Rich Levy. I'm Executive Director of Inprint. Since 1980, this series has presented about 400 extraordinary writers from 39 countries, winners of 13 Nobel Prizes, 73 Pulitzer Prizes, 67 National Book Awards, 19 Booker Prizes, as well as 23 U.S. Poets Laureate. We work hard to bring you some of the world's best authors in a series accessible to everyone. Thank you for joining us on the journey. Next up, on November 18th at the Cullen Theater, Wortham Center, we welcome back to Houston Ta-Nehisi Coates. who was last in the series with his debut novel, The Water Dancer, in 2019. He comes to us with his new essay collection, The Message. Ta-Nehisi will converse with acclaimed author Kiese Lehman, Rice University's Libby Sharon Moody Professor of Creative Writing and English. Excuse me. General admission tickets for this reading go on sale tomorrow at noon at Inprint.org. Please note that each ticket includes a copy of The Message, so to speak. And then on December 2, the Monday after Thanksgiving weekend, back here at the Alley Theater, we present acclaimed author Rachel Kushner with her new novel, Creation Lake, a finalist for this year's Booker Prize. Tickets for this reading go on sale at noon on Tuesday, November 12th, Inprint.org. Season tickets are also on sale online until 11 a.m. tomorrow or via QR code in the lobby. Last chance, great perks, free books, best seats in the house, free parking, I promise, first in line book signing, online access to the series, something to keep in mind for great writers ahead. Details at Inprint.org. We invite you to the online Inprint Book Club. We'll focus on Dinez Smith's Bluff on October 27th. Our Escritores, and that's focused on writers in the series. Our Escritores en la Casa series, featuring top authors in Spanish, presents award-winning novelist and singer-songwriter Rita Indiana this Thursday, October 24th. It's all in Spanish. The Inprint Cool Brains series for middle grade kids is airborne on November 10th with three-time Newbery Honor Award winner Christina Suntornvat with her new book, The Squad, free books for the first 100 families. We also offer in-print writing workshops for aspiring authors and free workshops across Houston for senior citizens, K-12 teachers, healthcare providers, and the incarcerated so that all may tell their stories, plus our archive of readings, support for emerging authors, and more, Inprint.org. The Margaret Root Brown Reading Series is made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Arts. Inprint also receives invaluable support from the Brown Foundation. The series is named for one of its founders, the Jerry C. Deering Family Foundation, Houston Endowment, the City of Houston through the Houston Arts Alliance, and the Texas Commission on the Arts. Special thanks to W.W. Norton, Richard's publisher. After Richard reads from and talks about Playground, he'll join in conversation with Lacy right here. Lacy Johnson is a Houston-based professor, curator, activist, and author. She's written The Reckonings and The Other Side, both National Book Critics Circle Award finalists, and Trespasses. She is editor with designer Cheryl Beckett of More City Than Water, a Houston Flood Atlas. She teaches creative nonfiction at Rice University and is the founding director of the Houston Flood Museum. We're delighted, she's the founder, I should say. We're delighted Lacy is with us tonight. Afterwards, Richard will meet you in the lobby if you like. Please note that Richard doesn't sign books, but will provide you with a signed book plate, which he is happy to personalize. Brazos Bookstore is here tonight offering a 10% discount on Playground and online at brazosbookstore.com through Sunday. The discount code is Imprint. Brazos also has signed book plates. Richard Powers, a MacArthur Genius Fellowship recipient, demonstrates a remarkable ability, according to the Washington Post, to tell dramatic, emotionally involving stories while delving into subjects many readers would otherwise find arcane, such as genetics, pharmaceuticals, artificial intelligence, music, and photography. His 14 best-selling novels written over a 40-year career include two he has shared with us here in this series, The Echo Maker, winner of the National Book Award, which focuses on neurology, Capgras syndrome, I think. In October 2007, and The Overstory, which won the Pulitzer Prize just days before Richard arrived in Houston in April 2019. Very good timing. Ann Patchett called it the best novel ever written about trees, and really just one of the best novels, period. And Barbara Kingsolver wrote of the book, The Overstory accomplishes what few living writers from either art or science could attempt, a gigantic fable of genuine truths. In Power's new novel, Playground, a trailblazing female oceanographer remarks, if you want to make something smarter, teach it to play. As Heller McAlpin writes on NPR.com, while it brims with love for humanity and the planet, the book nimbly hopscotches between the wonders of nature and the marvels and dangers of cutting-edge science and technology. Play runs through Playground like a school of fish, but one chased by the threat of disasters wrought by human behavior and climate change. The novel, which threads together 4 lives from across the globe, an oceanographer, an artist, a teacher, and a techie, was longlisted for the Booker Prize, a finalist for the Kirkus Prize, and has met with rapturous praise. Percival Everett says of Playground, is there anything Richard Powers cannot write? The world here is complete, seductive, and promising. The writing feels like the ocean, vast, mysterious, deep, and alive. Prepare to be awed, writes Ron Charles in the Washington Post. I can't think of a novel that treats the Earth's plight with such an expansive vision. The Observer calls Playground a book of true, indisputable greatness. Powers writes with erudition and electrifying beauty. And Hamilton Kane in the Boston Globe calls it richly hued, gorgeous. No author has done more to turn our gaze outward to the mysteries of the universe, above our heads and below our feet. The Independent writes, Playground isn't merely a great American novel, but a magnificent one. Brilliant on the complications of friendship, incandescently beautiful. You'll never look at the ocean the same way again. Well, clearly, we are fortunate to have this powerful and singular and wonderful author back in Houston with his new, compelling, deeply moving novel. Let's give a warm, rousing Houston welcome to Richard Powers.
This mic stand worked for Rich. Thank you for that generous introduction. I have to say there were less favorable reviews as well. Just putting all my cards on the table. 57 years ago, for my 10th birthday, in my childhood home on the north side of Chicago, my big sister Peg gave me a book on coral reefs. I remember looking out my bedroom window at my neighbor's Chicago brick bungalow homes, then looking back down at the pictures of coral cities filled with alien creatures. It felt as if the Earth were 2 impossibly different planets, and I knew which one I wanted to live on. I never learned why Peg gave me that unlikely gift. She sometimes enjoyed pure caprice. But the book rocked me. By life-changing luck, the next year found me in the South China Sea, near Bangkok, my new home, snorkeling alongside the bizarre creatures that I knew so well from my book. From the age of 11 to the age of 16, when my family moved back to the States, I lived near the Pacific Ocean, spending as much time in it as I could. I knew I would become a marine biologist when I grew up. I got sidetracked. The sudden death of my sister 2 years ago reminded me of her odd birthday present and the life I was so sure I would lead. My childhood dreams were long gone, and the reefs I swam in were now mostly gone as well. Lost, perhaps for good, in a rush to a technological climax that on most days felt too terrifying to consider. I found a partial answer to that terror in one of the world's least known great books, 1938's Homo Ludens by the Dutch art historian Johan Huizinga. There is a way, Huizinga says, of living with uncertainty and bearing the unbearable, a kind of experiment way older than civilization. It's the engine of evolution, both biological and cultural, life's way of testing, training, and extending itself. It's called play. I set off to write a book about the ocean that I dove in as a child, an ocean that half a century later has been decimated. But in recreating that 10-year-old Chicago North Sider who wanted to be a marine biologist, I also recalled my unlikely cross-town, cross-racial friendship with a South Sider, one that followed me into old age, a friendship sustained by fierce and constant competition. In the book, that friendship becomes a 30-year-long game played between two frenemies whose moves and counter-moves knock the world into a different orbit. We play with words, and we play with possibilities. We play sports and play music and put on a play, and the play is always the thing. We play dead, and we play with fire, and we play the field, and we play God. The OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, has 247 entries containing the word play, and it gives those entries 603 different meanings. The play we play far outweighs the work we work. As Huizinga puts it, play merges quite naturally with the idea of holiness. People have an imperishable desire to live in beauty, and there is no satisfying that desire finally, except in play. The book turned into a meditation on evolution, both Darwin's endless forms most beautiful, as well as the far faster evolution of human prosthetics that are steamrollering the planet. But being about evolution, it also had to deal with that shockingly powerful evolved adaptation, love. The love between two men locked together in decades of brutal competition. The love between two good people who should never have married. The love of a 92-year-old woman for the vanishing reefs she has given her life to. The love that 80 people feel for their 4 square miles of damaged but recovering Polynesian island that is their home. Playground feels like the closest thing to a pure gift that 40 years of writing have given me. That gift lay in remembering how to love and go on playing, even in the face of endless loss. As Daniel Mason says in his great novel, North Woods, the only way to understand the world as something other than a tale of loss is to see it as a tale of change. Or in the words of James P. Carse, a finite game is played for the purpose of winning. An infinite game for the purpose of continuing the play. My terror at the future has hardly gone away as a consequence of writing this book. I mean, how could it? A wave that started out in the ocean 4 billion years ago with chains of freely playing molecules is about to break over our heads next year or the year after next with new kinds of creatures trained on games who will iterate millions of enhanced generations of themselves in the time it takes us to make a single move. No one is ready for that coming tidal wave. But playground is my attempt to surf that tsunami. Because when you live on a planet that's mostly rising ocean, surfing is the game that lets you keep on playing. I have a short passage. I've been reading the very opening 2 pages at other stops on this book tour. It's a Polynesian creation myth that I fell in love with while researching the book. But knowing that I was going to be on stage tonight with Lacy Johnson, whose essays overwhelm me with their wisdom and their beauty, I decided to read a different passage, one that I thought somehow might put me in conversation with some of the themes that are most of interest to her. This frame is the one that Rich alluded to in his intro, a French-Canadian girl who's somewhat traumatized by World War II. Her uncle dies in the Pacific, and her mother has a nervous breakdown as a result, and she's an extremely timid girl. She's convinced the Nazis are going to land in Montreal at any moment. Comes through the war. Her father is an engineer. He works for the North American branch of the company that Jacques Cousteau founded to make the first aqualungs. And in an attempt to get her over her young, youthful trauma and the timidity that completely controls her 12-year-old life, her father basically throws her in a swimming pool with one of these aqualungs strapped to her back and tells her, all you need to do is breathe. And she discovers that under the water is her idiom. And she goes on asserting herself in this infant career of diver in a male-dominated job. She goes on to become one of the world's better-known divers, and her fame leads a well-known photography magazine to contact her about going off of the island of Truk in the Pacific, where you may know a tremendous naval battle was fought during the Second World War, and going down and photographing these war machines that are now lying on the bottom of the ocean, and to see what they look like after 30 years. And she takes this assignment knowing that somewhere in this graveyard of dead, her uncle is also among those who are on the ocean bottom. So I'm just going to jump into the middle of the scene. The hulls and decks were so mangled by shells and collisions with the ocean bottom that Evie struggled to tell which way some of the ships were facing. One of the vessels lay on its side with large pieces buckled in every direction. Another of the battleships, repeatedly bombed and torpedoed, had shed its turrets and cranes, conning towers, funnels, anti-aircraft guns, and gun directors across several hectares. Everywhere a cluster of parts landed, it spawned a new reef. Life covered every inch of the twisted surfaces and turned them into high-rise dwellings. A brass ship's throttle, its handle stuck to a speed that failed to save it, like some wild Miro sculpture caked in starfish and worms. Morays nestled in the gun barrels. One ship's crumpled mast was so coated with swirls of whip coral and anemones that it, too, branched as if alive. Troops of porcelain crabs skittered in formation. Nudibranchs slithered across bits of blasted deck as if some wedding had scattered hallucinogenic bouquets. Eveline focused her dives on the carrier transport. Most of its half a dozen hulls were punctured. The steep cliff sides, 400 feet long, were encrusted with sessile animals. All around the wreck grew several dozen species of plants. She did a quick tally of corals, but lost count after several dozen. The fish were even more various. Sharks, barracuda, trevallies, snappers, and other top predators abounded. The colors alone defied belief. Black coral decorated the hull and visible deck. Spectral sponges in crazy numbers, silver, pallid, and alabaster, encrusted the gunnels and waved in the current. Milky glassfish patrolled the wreck's burst holes. Clouds of nacreous, pearly dartfish and blue-green chromis damselfish schooled around her, running their own investigations. The reds, burgundies, and oranges of marbled shrimp in all their stages clattered through the hidey holes of the jumbled metal, looking like animated Christmas cards. Parrotfish, groupers, cardinalfish, gobies, two-tone darts, wrasses, blennies, scorpionfish, jellies, and other cnidarians. She couldn't begin to name all the colors. The new camera functioned well, clicking off pictures of the constant wonders. Eveline swam close to the main mast of the shattered ship. She grabbed hold of the tangled cross braces of an antenna tower. Her hand came away crawling with living things. Skirting a ruined bulkhead, she approached the rail above the gangway. She gestured for the other two divers to follow, then passed through a blast hole into the hull, deeper into the wreck. As she entered the obscurity of the enclosed staterooms below, plants and corals, creatures of the light, gave way to those who dealt in darkness. In the lower forward hold, she came across 2 flights of disassembled Mitsubishi fighters, and farther aft, a machine shop filled with cryptic tools and devices, their purpose no longer readable under the layers of accreting life. In one corner stood what must have been an air compressor, pipes snake-like limbs around its cylindrical body, and its twin circular gauges looked like goggles on a robot from a dark and silent future. She pressed deeper into the ship, forcing her body through smaller crevices. Her path began to agitate her minders trailing behind her. Reef sharks were everywhere. White tips, black tips, and grays. The other 2 divers watched in horror as a 2-meter-long gray reef shark tore into a school of jack and made a kill. The scene so entranced Eveline that she forgot she was holding a camera. By the time she started shooting again, the shark was gone, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of entrail. More worrying than the emboldened predators were the mines and unexploded munitions, stockpiles of live projectiles that had gone down with the ship. No one had inventoried the dangers inside the wreck, the gas hazards and leaking toxins. Tangles of shredded steel and debris might shift with contact, blocking an exit or snaring a diver. Her dive mates beckoned to Eveline, begging her not to go any farther into the encrusted, murky maze. But she pressed on into the next room, whose marvels exceeded the ones that had already engulfed her. On the floor of the alcove stood a suite of upright flasks and wine bottles, covered in coral starts. Near them, dishes and utensils spawned a swarm of gorgons. A school of cardinalfish came and went above the living picnic. Garish worms and other invertebrates crawled over everything, kinds of life she couldn't even identify. She snapped pictures like mad, not just for the article's future audience, but for her own chance to discover what she was looking at later on the surface. Then her eyes settled on a thing that she knew in a flash, even with almost nothing left to go by. The remains of two sailors clutched each other underneath the eternally renewing bouquets that had sprung up on their ad hoc grave. Eveline hung in place above the pair of skeletons. The eye sockets of one stared up through the cracks in the ceiling above. She was likely the first person to see this pair of corpses since their world ended in a play of waves. It fell to her to consecrate the deaths of these men whom her people had hated with a hatred that had felt pure and righteous. Men who had killed her uncle. Thousands more lay dead, scattered through this crypt, and the sea had turned them all into new experiments. They all called out for her benediction. She took no pictures and spoke no blessings. She left them to their continuing conversion. They, too, had become a reef. The muffled hum of fish was their equal music. The surprise of death was their equal possession. The sea was their equal eternity.
Thank you so much. I successfully did not fall down the stairs. I was worried about that. Thank you so much for that. I really love that you read that section because, this is a world like the underwater coral world that I think most of us don't get to see. We see pictures, we don't get to visit, but I think hearing this story and seeing, being able to imagine it, it allows us to visit this place right in our minds. Mm-hmm. And it also reminds me, of course, that we, I don't know if everybody knows this, but we have a coral reef in the Gulf of Mexico, the Flower Garden banks. And there are coral, because of all the offshore drilling rigs and all the infrastructure out there, it's also the largest artificial coral reef in the world, right? So some of that was reminding me of that. But I actually want to just start by asking you about sadness, if that's okay. I know that you said you wanted to have a fun conversation, but...
Get that out of the way early.
Yeah, let's get that. We'll head toward fun. But there's a moment fairly early in the novel when one of the characters needs to write an essay, right, to get into this private high school. In response to the prompt, what is the most important quality any person could possess? And the answer he gives is sadness. You write, sadness is the key to loving what you love and to becoming better than you were. I wonder whether you could talk about this a bit more. Why sadness? And maybe what is the relationship between that particular affect and action?
Yeah. I wish I could see his whole essay now. Something to the effect of, without sadness, we would be monsters. And yet so much of our energies is spent trying to avoid that state, as if it's the enemy of meaning. Whereas so much of meaning does come out of our capacity to feel that. And in some ways, that's why I wanted to read this passage, the view of this transformed scene of mass violence, pointless hatred, and Eveline bringing her own family sorrows to this site. And I guess when I said that, I thought it might put us into conversation. So much of what moves me so deeply in your essays is this question of how do we redeem the horrible and the violent and the tragic in our own experience, but see the capacity to feel sadness. It's it gives us the ability to name the thing that we've lost, or that we wish we had. The capacity to mourn is also the capacity to love. It's just the other name for the thing on the other side of the verb wheel. The tense, the future perfect tense of grief. Grief is love, and of love is grief. I mean, the one turns into the other. And the ability to feel sadness is also the ability to say, this is where the source of my life's meaning comes from. Yeah.
I really appreciate the saying that grief is love with nowhere to go. Right. Yeah. Which, I don't know who said it. I keep hearing it in times of grief.
I'm going to say it now.
Okay, yeah.
That's right. It's mine now.
But I'm also, you can have it. We can all say it. We can all just have that for ourselves. I'm also thinking about the moment towards the end of the book where Eveline is working on the second to the last chapter of the book that she is writing for young people, right, about the ocean. And she decides to be candid with her audience about the destruction of the world's ocean. Yeah. But she doesn't want to leave it there on this sad note of the naked truth. I mean, she writes, like, it's this beautiful thing that I've spent all these pages writing about.
She's writing for younger readers too, and she doesn't want to destroy them, but she also doesn't want to lie to them.
Right.
Yeah.
But she does end up finding a beautiful ending for the book. And I wanted to ask you, as a writer, how you think about this dilemma as well, right? The balance of hope and, offering a sort of like, this is action, this is like the way forward. But also thinking about truth in writing stories, particularly about the planet and our place in it. Yeah. Like, how do you grapple with that?
Yeah. You're not cutting me any slack here, are you?
In the sound check, we were talking about our lunches. We can go back to that.
Yeah, and the beauty of the Smokies. Yeah. So let me take a running start at this by going back to this question of sadness. When you read a book and you recommend it to your friends, you say, I loved this book. I was weeping by the end, right? We treasure that ability to feel things intensely through knowing how much life has the capacity to hurt us. It's redemptive. It's weirdly redemptive. And, we say, it moved me. And the word, the word emotion has etymologically built into it. It moved me. And without that capacity to weep at a story, you're not changing. You're not moving anywhere. You're not going anywhere. So it's not unrelated to this question of, hope as a narrative. How do we put a story out there? As one of my characters from the Overstory, who's preparing a speech, she says, the trick is to make the story useful, hopeful, and true. And it's a tough trifecta. Yeah. We can get two of them. To get all three of them is really tough. Yeah. And the reality is, when I was researching this book, there were moments where I had no hope. I mean, if you read about what's happening to coral reefs, the odds of there being any coral left by the end of this century are very low. And the scientists make no bones about it. But if you come out in a book, in any kind of book, fiction or nonfiction, and say there is no hope, then the whole project disappears, right? Then not only have you sacrificed hope, but you've sacrificed utility as well. Now, I've been thinking about this a lot because it comes up everywhere I go. Do you, Richard Powers, do you have hope for the future? Do you have hope for the oceans? If you know this is happening to the reefs, if you know what's happening to the fish stocks, if you know the amount of microplastics that are going into the ocean every year, how do you keep going? What stories do you continue to tell? How do you get hope back from the useful and the true? How do you recover it? And I have a couple answers now. And eventually I will have only one, but at this point, since it's not refined enough yet, I'll give you both of them. First of all, you know, if you go to a doctor and you say, you know, having surrendered to all the tests and the scans, and you go in and you say, "Doctor, am I dying?" You know, the correct answer is always yes, but not yet. And we all know that. I mean, that's the curse of being a human being. I mean, what other animal has full knowledge of their own mortality? Maybe some of them do, I don't know. But the reality is we're living with hopelessness every day of our lives. You know, as John Maynard Keynes says, in the long run, we're all dead, right? And yet that hopelessness about our own fate, ultimate fate, doesn't take away meaning. Right. It creates meaning, right? It compels us to love and to work and to play and to be in the world and to pursue meaningful activities. And so, you know, the second part of this is that maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe when we say, is there hope, we're looking for a guarantee, you know, we're looking for some kind of ultimate safety before we commit ourselves. You know, if it's not going to be there, you know, why should I engage it? If the whole thing is hopeless, right? But the reality is there never is any safety. Yeah. And there never is any continuance. There is always loss. There is always change. But how do you, you know, in Daniel Mason's formulation, how do you go from being paralyzed by loss or, you know, overwhelmed with the terror of your own hopelessness to something easier and lighter and more engaged? And I think the answer is simply to realize that we actually don't need hope. We need meaning, right? We need to know that what we're giving ourselves to, what we're giving our love to, what we're giving our action to, and our commitment and our energy and our time is meaningful. And meaning is not a function of hope. And you know, the reality is, however hopeless the situation is for preserving the world in its current state, there's infinite amount of meaning in simply going out and doing what you can to rehabilitate it and to take your part in it. So I say there's no hope of winning the finite game, of beating nature or beating death. But there's always hope for rejoining the infinite game. And however long we get at that, you know, it's meaningful.
Yeah. Can we just applaud that answer? Thank you.
Do you feel some kind of affinity with that? I mean, I felt
Of
that
course.
message in so many of
Yeah.
your essays.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's so generous of you to refer to my work. I mean, thank you. I want to talk about you. Maybe when my book comes out, you can come and we'll talk about me. But I think, you know, I've been doing a lot of research for the book that I'm writing now, which is about biodiversity loss and habitat loss. And, you know, and I've been interviewing a lot of scientists that work on preserving these ecosystems. And, you know, one of the things that keeps coming up over and over, the question I always ask them is like, how do you go on knowing what you know about the risks to this ecosystem, the sort of likelihood that it's gonna persist? You know, I'm thinking about like the San Marcos Springs, for example. Up, you know, in San Marcos. Yeah. Surprise. But, you know, the water table, the aquifer is being drained because of development, because of drought. And there are these like really precious ecosystems. Texas wild rice lives there and nowhere else on the planet. Wow. And there are all these scientists who get into the river basically every day, clean out the invasive species, knowing that the water table is, you know, eventually going to go down and this spring is going to go away. And so I'm like, well, how and why are you able to come to work every day? And they say, because I believe it deserves to exist.
Yeah.
You know, and I have the power to do what I can to help it continue to exist as long as it can, right? And I think one of the things that comes up for me so much is that when we are feeling helpless, and when we're feeling hopeless, it's also a part of feeling helpless. There's not very much that we can do, is how we feel, right? To change the outcome, whatever that may be. But the people who are finding ways to be helpful, that something about being helpful allows you to feel less helpless, that you are doing something, taking some action, and that was something that you were saying too, right?
Absolutely. And you know, I talk to scientists in the course of writing this book, and sometimes they would say some variation on, you know, too much hope is a narcotic.
Yeah.
You know, it prevents people from being in the world and from attending and being present to what's happening, right? But I also think there's something about the culture of science that is intrinsically an infinite game, right? It is the process of discovery, the process of knowing, you know, the true part, the useful, hopeful, and true. Committing to an eternal relationship with being in that process is so different than the culture of commodity-mediated, individualist, you know, meism that we've all been colonized by, which is, you know, which is all about product, right? And just making that subtle shift from possession to presence, you know, from the idea that we can win the infinite game by just getting a little bit more, right? To this other thing of the game goes on forever, and I've just been part of a very long stream of contributions. I like that about science. Yeah.
I guess one of the things that I struggle with thinking about as a writer is thinking about what my role in these crises can and should be. You know, I mean, I think, you know, when I think about the scale of some of these problems, you know, and then I'm just, you know, it feels so small, right? To, you know, sort of sit at my laptop and, you know, type my little words, not to sort of make writing small, but it feel, you know, given the scale of things, it doesn't feel as direct as working in the river or as, you know, transplanting coral or something like that, right? But I also know that I, as a storyteller, can deploy my creativity to imagine a different future. And that storytelling, as you said earlier, is one of the main ways that we make meaning. So maybe we can think together about what is the role of storytelling in these times?
You know, I'm probably guilty of wanting to believe that that writing can change the world or save the world. What it can do indisputably is create a shift in consciousness.
Yeah, that movement that you're saying
Yeah,
earlier, right?
it can move a person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, to you know, it's very fulsome to keep quoting yourself, but there's another character in Overstory who says, you know, all the best arguments in the world can't change a person's mind. The only thing that can do that is a good story. And I think that's actually quite well documented by experimental psychologists, you know, that graphs and facts and arguments simply make the person that you're presenting to fight back with their own graphs and arguments and you know, facts. In fact, we're living in a culture that is now pretty committed to making your own facts. But it's quite well documented that if you ask somebody, if you say, now imagine that you're this person in this situation, and, you know, or just like a simple question of, let's say you die and you're going to come back, you're going to be reincarnated. what country in the world do you want to be reincarnated in, right? Just those simple acts of imaginative projection and identification predispose people to much more expansive ways of thinking in subsequent interactions. The one that I love, this is, if you haven't read it, the Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, just extraordinary. And one of the great psychological tests that he references in this book is the subjects sit and answer several questions. They have to make sentences out of 10 random words, so-called random words. And then when they're done doing this several times, they have to take the exam and walk down the hallway and put it on somebody's desk. And of course, that's not the test at all. The test is that some Confederate is coming down the hall and dumps, with 100 golf pencils all over the hallway. And the question is, how much time does the person who's just finished the exam take to get down on his knees and help collect the pencils? And if the sentences that they're making have to do with, time and money and, efficiency, on average, the time is vastly shorter than if they have the words are love and grandmother and all these other good things. Just by making a sentence using these different words, they have a measurably different reaction to this so-called random stimulus. So I have no doubt that the reader of a book who's generous and engaged and present to that book is going to be different for a while after reading that book. And again, I still want to save everything that, the compulsion to redeem everything that's broken. I understand that as a basic character flaw in myself, but the reality is, if someone who's made a journey with you is a little bit different, you cannot do the calculus, the cost-benefit calculus on that. And in fact, I've read, again, other people who have studied social movements say that there's a trigger, there's a tipping point. When X percent of people of a big social group have a shift in consciousness, that the collective behavior shifts. I mean, you've heard it called different things, the 99th monkey, that kind of thing. The trigger is actually fairly low. I mean, the estimate is that it probably takes fewer than 10% of a large population of people to have a shift in attitude about something in order for that cascade effect to take place. And we've seen it. I've seen it several times in my lifetime. Most recently with gender definitions, right? If you had told me 20 years ago that the United States of America would be, open to same-sex marriage or gender reassignment, that I would have been very skeptical. But something happened, and I think it wasn't the graphs. Right. It wasn't the arguments. It was the TV shows. Literally, it was the movies and the TV shows.
It was the stories of sort of entering the life of another, right?
Yeah.
And I'll say, for this novel too, I mean, there was a moment when because I was researching and reading about the flower garden banks, and I kind of wanted to go see it. Every other ecosystem that I'm writing about, I go and visit it, but it's quite far under the ocean, and I don't know how to scuba dive. And so I had kind of gone, well, I'm just going to go see the aquarium, and that'll be good enough. And I kind of just did it. I'm a little afraid of swimming, but I think that this novel made me say, no, I think I'm gonna learn, and I'm gonna do it. I want to go see.
You can probably imagine as a writer, and I was thinking of this while I was reading this. Why am I reading this? Because it's underwater, there can't be any dialogue, right? So, she can't see more than 15 feet in front of her. All the senses are, constrained, and we can't live there. And in fact, the scene ends in a kind of stressful way because you're always on the clock, right? And if anything happens, you're in trouble. So we're such alien invaders. So, when I wrote about trees, it was so easy, I could go out and I could stand under an oak for as long as I wanted to and just keep looking until I saw things.
Yeah.
And this was tough. I mean, to take us into a totally different element and try to use words to still do it,
Were you casting that from memory? Were you watching videos? Like, how do you imagine us into those places? Will you talk a little bit about your process there?
There are a lot of contributions. I had, as I mentioned in my short little intro, quite a strong relationship with the ocean growing up. There's a great bibliography, many wonderful memoirs, and in fact, the character of Evelyne Beaulieu, many of her professional details are inspired by Sylvia Earle, who has probably done more than any single person to make the ocean real to us and to make the ocean urgent to us. She's 89 years old, still going strong, and her writing is just so beautiful, whether she's writing about the ocean or whether she's writing about herself in the ocean. Yeah, so there were many places to go to see how that might be done.
One of the most interesting tensions in the novel, I think, is the one between the isolated individual acting alone and accountable to no one, and the community who is accountable to each other. I'm thinking of Todd Keene, for example, who's very human-centric and feels cast out and isolated when he's rejected by his human friends. But I'm also thinking of Evelyne, who spends a lot of time solo diving, but thinks of herself in community with all the life forms of the sea, right? And doesn't experience solo diving in any way as isolation. And there's a moment on the island when the community finds itself maybe a little paralyzed as it's trying to figure out how to weigh its rules for belonging. Like, what are the rules that we're going to write here? And there's a wonderful moment where a child says, like, well, we should also count the creatures of the sea who are going to be impacted by our decision. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if maybe you can talk a little bit more also about the dynamics that you were exploring in these moments between the individual and the community. I mean, you alluded to them a little bit already.
In some ways, I think it might be the first time that I tried to write a novel where a large part of the novel is a community drama. Yeah, because as I look back on the work, there are a lot of loners in these books. There are a lot of outsiders. They're not always lonely, but they're often solitary. And just to set the context for this, and I think Rich alluded to this in his intro too, one of the narrative frames has to do with this small island in French Polynesia. It's about half the size of Manhattan, and it's already had a very tumultuous relationship with exploitation. So it's one of the few Pacific phosphate islands. You might know of Nauru is probably the most famous of the group. But Margarett also was discovered at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, to have vast deposits of phosphate rock, which of course the rest of the world desperately needed because its population was exploding. And there followed several decades of extraction where this island was literally consumed and exported all around the world in order to be spread on the fields of other countries to increase their crop yields. And in Polynesian culture, in the Tahitian and the Tuamotuan languages, the word is whenua, land. But it's more than land. It's almost like essence. So for this place where the island itself is your umbilical, to be completely exploited in this colonialist extended exploitation where for decades and decades you're watching your Fenelon disappear. Now in the 21st century, so at the height of these the phosphate mines, there were thousands of people living on this island and chopping it up and shipping it off. And after the mines were closed, that population crashed to under 100 people. And so the few survivors on this island, who were just getting by in a subsistence life, are now presented in the second decade of the 21st century with this new proposal. A Silicon Valley consortium wants to use the island as a base for constructing modules for the creation of floating cities, seasteading, these cities that would float out beyond national waters and be out in the unregulated, great international ocean, or very, very loosely regulated. And they have to, as a community, all 82 of them, they have to decide, is this their ticket to a sustainable, merciful, robust life? Or is it chapter 2 of what they've already been through? And it was new for me to try to make a community of people, some of whom were very sympathetically trying to say, this could be a hospital. This could mean that our children don't have to leave when they grow up. We could have a decent school here, and there, we could have a quality of life that's unthinkable to us now. And that had to be totally sympathetic, depending on what character was voicing it. But the other side saying, we have been to the bottom of this, and we're lucky still to be here. And our island is coming back from this after all these decades. Do we really want to go through the mill again? So, to create that as a sympathetic, dialogical, political dilemma was new for me. Yeah.
And it just reminds me also of so many of the conversations that I feel like a lot of us are having about the future, or thinking about in terms of the future. Like that particular, the model of this, the offer of seasteading, it reminds me so much of the sort of little enterprise that's going on down the coast a little bit, known as Starbase, right? Of thinking about sort of, we're going to use this place as a launching pad, and whatever wreckage we leave behind is beside the point, because our destination is the stars, right? It's somewhere in the future, right? But there's so much, like, even though like what you're writing about is a fictional world and maybe fictional sort of scenarios, like it feels so urgent and present, and even though this is not French Polynesia, this is the Gulf Coast, feels quite local and germane, right?
There's a Polynesian phrase that I came across while researching the book that I really loved. Every island is a canoe, and every canoe is an island. And of course, the whole point of Makatea as a microcosm is, can you tell a story that makes it newly real, newly visceral to people, that we're on an island here, we're on a very small canoe here, all of us.
All of us.
And that choice, is an emblem of the choice that we're making all the time in every locale, but also collectively on this little island Earth.
Right, and how do we decide who gets a say in what this place is going to be?
Yeah, yeah. Shouldn't all the creatures who are impacted by it get a say?
Right.
Yeah.
Another tension in this novel, or maybe I should characterize it actually as ambivalence, but is around technology and its uses, right? Many of your novels have explored the possibilities and perils of technology. I don't think it's a spoiler to mention that one of the ways you grapple with those questions here is through AI, right? I wonder if AI presents different existential questions for us now than maybe previous technological innovations, or perhaps escalates existing tensions in a different way.
So again, to contextualize it a little bit, Todd Keene, who's narrating the book, is the North Sider. And he goes to this elite high school and meets Rafi Young, who's the South Sider. And they bond over a lot of things. They bond over both having horribly dysfunctional families. They bond over both being bright. They bond over both being social outcasts. But they're also quite opposed in the way that they decide to commit their own skills to. And Todd is a formal thinker. He falls in love with computer programming, and Rafi finds in poetry first and in literature something that can finally stabilize his horrific childhood. And the friendship becomes this push-pull between ways of knowing the world. By the way, they're born in 1970, which means, and I did that in part because my Rafi was born in 1970, and so when he was telling me his story about Chicago and I was transcribing it and trying to get all the details right, that was situated in a certain moment in Chicago, but it worked out perfectly for me because they then become the last people in this country to have been born into the pre-personal computer world and to be exposed to these machines when they're young. So they have the first few years of analog life, and then they're suddenly confronted with these things. And that to tell Keene's story, from his first little game of Simon. Do you remember this game with the lights? Yeah, and just thinking like somehow this was better than a sea creature, because he got the book on corals when he was 10, but by 12 he's thinking, wow, the color changing creature is here in my hands, and I can make it. I can extend it. I can create new instances of it. And that sense of the unprecedented sense of bringing something new in the world just by specifying things, just by writing out a little code. So how completely transformative was that? Everything. I mean, it's I was going to say it's on par with writing, but it's in fact, it is writing. It's just a continuation of writing. But what was fun or instructive to me was to try to remember what consciousness was like before that, and then to try to show how rapidly we just completely assimilate it and normalize it. And he, in the little scene where he happens to be suffering, he's just been diagnosed with Lewy body dementia. So he's trying to tell his story as rapidly as he can, because he's become his own unreliable narrator. And he's saying this childhood toy, what was its name? And he tells the story about seeing it and how it sets him down the road to programming, and how eventually he witnesses the infant internet. He writes one of the very first social networking platforms. And he takes that fortune and he invests it in AI. But as he's telling the stories, he can't remember the name of this toy. And he says, fortunately, I have a little black slab in my pocket that can tell me everything, from anywhere, about anything. So it's not just AI per se, but it's this incredible leverage over time and space and fact that our devices give us, that we no longer even see. They've just become a part of what we think the human being is, right? And when you go back and you say, I remember seeing my first Frisbee, to try to go back to that, to the way that we lived in time then and the way that we lived in place, it's almost unreachable.
I am old enough, believe it or not, to remember, the time before cordless phones, right? Right? When having a cordless phone was an amazing thing. Not just a cell phone, but a cordless
A
phone.
landline where you
Yeah.
could walk around with it.
Right, and
was
yeah, a landline, yeah, it's like got a spiral cord that connects you to the wall. And I tell my children about how the way things used to be, and they're like, "You mean in the 1900s?" And I'm like, "Technically, yes, but it's rude that you put it that way." They'll say, "Did you have buses when you were a kid?" It's like, "Yes, we sure did. They were yellow too."
But we had to put our finger in this circle and move it around 7 times.
Do you, as a person who's then sort of witnessed, all this rapid shift in technology and ability to look something up on have the computing power in your pocket that was more than what sent the first, ships to the moon, have you noticed your own creativity changing in any kind of way, or does it evolve alongside the technology, or it's completely separate from it, has nothing to do with one another?
It's all of us, right? I mean, we've all become like gods, but we normalize it, and now we just want a little bit more, right? That famous Rockefeller, the answer to the question, how much is enough? And his answer is just a little bit more. But you asked first about AI, and, what are the affordances there? We never in a million years would have said that this country would be at one another's throats, right? Where you're afraid of your neighbor and you don't want to talk about certain things in public because it could get ugly fast, And we would never have thought that would come out of social media. So we can't see the affordances of the technology, even as we're embracing it wholeheartedly, And we don't know enough about how to regulate it so that the good affordances come out and the bad ones are suppressed. Well, and that's bad enough with something like the web, which has some comparison to technologies that we've been using all along. But when you start talking about AI, in some ways, there's no precursor category. And, the question keeps coming up on tour, well, what are your feelings about it? How sanguine or how terrified are you feeling about it? And I have to say, I've been reading as much as I can for a couple of years now. And in fact, I wrote my first book about AI 30 years ago next year, right, where I kind of predict a large language model. But, no matter how much research I did on this, I was no closer to a decent answer, because you look at the people who are out there and in the front lines of creating these frontier models, and you get everything from total doomers to techno-utopians. And these are the people who are making these things, right? How can we, make an informed decision about what our prospects are when they're all over the map? Why are they all over the map? Because we don't actually have pre-existing categories for what we're making. Mm-hmm. We've never seen entities like this applied in the way that we think we're ultimately going to apply them. So pretty scary, yeah. But not without excitement, not without the possibility of great transformations. And in fact, there are ways in which that technology may cure some of the excesses and spin-outs of the current level of technology. But what has to happen is we have to be able to tell stories to each other as a society that resituate us from the way that we're walking into this now, which is what can we do, and reestablish the real question, which is what do we want to do? And for that, we really do need endless stories in the social space that can make us more capable of doing that as a collective in the way that Margarett has to make their decision. We're on this little island and there's a referendum in front of us, right? No vote is a bad vote,
who do we want to be?
Yeah.
Like how do we get there? What is the vision of the future? We have just a few minutes left, and so I wonder if we might go back to talking about place and talking about the natural world and, get away from scary technology, before I have an existential crisis and fall down the stairs. So I wonder if we just might end with you talking a little bit about the place that you currently call home. You live in Eastern Tennessee, I believe, and I wonder how your community was impacted by the recent storm.
I was on book tour when Helene hit, so I had to find out about my town. My town has about 450 people over the phone, and we did dodge the worst of it. The storm had come across the Panhandle and turned in Georgia, and it was heading right for Eastern Tennessee, and then it just went a little bit to the east, and it ended up on the other side of the spine, and Asheville and Boone and all the surrounding communities there took the brunt of it. And I think we all have survivor's guilt, because we were on that track.
We know about that.
No doubt. Yeah.
And you mentioned to me earlier, before we came out, that you moved there in 2016, right? So just not that long ago, but I read that it was after a visit to the national park. And I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what it was about that place that called to you.
So I was writing the Overstory, and I was living out in Northern California. And it was, in fact, the redwoods in the Santa Cruz Mountains that had initially inspired me to start that book. And something really happened to me, and I still kind of marvel at it. I think I was like this when I was young, where I thought I had that childhood animism, and pantheism that little kids have. But I got it back somehow in the redwood forests. And then I just became obsessed, and every tree, which had just been kind of a frilly green blur to me, they all started to differentiate, and they all started to get personalities and behaviors, and it vastly enriched my life to move from a functional relationship to plants to a personal one. And the more I read, the more I kept hearing that unless you've seen a primary forest, unless you've seen an uncut old-growth forest, you really don't know what trees in the aggregate can do, west or east. And I went to the old-growth forest in the west, and I found that was true. And then I kept reading, if you want to see what an eastern broadleaf forest looked like 10,000 years ago, that one of the best places you can go to is the Smokies. Because it's still, I think, the largest contiguous eastern broadleaf old growth in the country. There's not much. You have to remember that somewhere between 95 and 98% of all North American forests have been cut. So almost every forest that you see is a recovering forest, and pretty young forest. And I thought, I'm an Easterner. I thought I knew what an eastern forest looked like. And I said, well, clearly I have to go there because all the books are telling me to go there. So I just booked a little yurt for 3 days on the eastern side of the park, of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And I walked up into a grove, and it was 2.5 miles up to get to the old growth grove. And it's hard to describe, but it's very abrupt. You're walking through a beautiful forest and you think this is magnificent, and it is. And then a few steps more and everything changes. And the light changes, and the smell changes, and the sounds change, and the species count is different. And there are maple trees that are 25 feet around. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And tulip poplars and hemlocks and, and it was like, I've said in the past that it's like that moment in The Wizard of Oz where it goes from black and white to color. 8 months later, I was still thinking about that. I was still thinking about how I felt when I went up there. And I thought, well, I can live anywhere I want, and this has to tell me something. So I went back and I bought a house, and I've been living there for the last 8 years. I don't always go up into the old growth. It's a little harder to get to, and I spend most of my time now probably in the recovering forests near to my house. I mean, there's 1,000 miles of trails in the Smokies, so it's great. You almost never have to repeat yourself, but I've come to love repeating myself. And I think that's the insight, that I still learn something every other day. There's something happening that I've never seen happen before. But the difference is that it's the first time in my life since I was a child, probably since I was swimming in the South China Sea, where I live where I live. And what the ground under my feet wants to do is part of my story. And to be in conversation with the neighbors, to say I'm a very small part of this very complex and very large set of interdependencies. It's been just about the perfect final chapter that I can think of.
I have just one last question. One of my biggest takeaways from Playground is just your invitation to reconsider the cost of so-called progress, right, on the places that we call home and the communities who make it home. What do you hope that readers will consider as they think about the future in our common home?
That no future is necessary or inevitable, and that asking what future we want to move into is often a function of remembering the past. And so much of the question of whether or not we're going to be here much longer has to do with establishing this relationship to place, with coming back home. And in that way, to the extent that the future is a meaningful continuation of our narrative, it has to be in synchrony with the beginning of the story and the middle of the story. As Robin Wall Kimmerer likes to say, we need to learn how to become indigenous again.